first, and again a warning, I will show footage that some viewers may find distressing. You see, I can't believe the recklessness of some journalists here. On the ABC, the national broadcaster, journalists who see these race riots in America with all the destruction and the violence, and they think, yes, the race politics that incited this should now come to Australia. This is incredible. You take the ABC's Triple J, for instance. It said the fury unleashed after the police killing of an unarmed black man, George Floyd, should be channeled to Australia. Australians, it said, need to turn their outrage at police brutality in the US to action in their own backyard. And the ABC's flagship AM program Today promoted a protest in Perth yesterday and advertised more protests to come, implying that Australian police often kill black men.
They wanted to show solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement, but also they want recognition for the high rates of Indigenous deaths in custody here.
These are all very live issues in Australia where, Aboriginal people's lives are unsafe and people are dying at the hands of police.
On the ABC's Radio National Breakfast this morning, the same seeming incitement from presenter Fran Kelly as she interviewed Labor frontbencher Linda Burney.
Should we, all of us, be using these race riots in the US as a moment to reflect on the problems here at home? I mean, the problems are not the same. Certainly, too many First Australians are dying in custody. Not all of them, in fact, I think not most of them, as a direct result of, a police shooting. It's often a case of inadequate medical care in custody, poor medical care in custody. But some of it is by, police behaviour, no doubt about it. But should we be using this now?
I think that we should be using it as an opportunity.
This seems to be almost inviting trouble to come here. I cannot believe how stupid and how inflammatory this is. And I've only given you a few examples. I could give you more. These people are pouring petrol all over Australia. And I also can't believe the deceit or the ignorance. Here's Fran Kelly again.
Those race riots over in America have helped turn attention here at home to the 430 First Nations people who've died in custody since the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody nearly 30 years ago.
Again, that theme, and it is so dangerously deceptive. Aboriginal prisoners are no more likely than white prisoners to die in jail. So clearly, warders in the jails aren't picking on them. This Royal Commission that Fran Kelly was talking about itself admitted that Aboriginal people in custody do not die at a greater rate than non-Aboriginal people in custody. Why doesn't the ABC report that? Or report another finding from the Royal Commission, that the commissioners did not find that the deaths were the product of deliberate violence or brutality by police or prison officers. Now, of course, we do have more Aboriginal men being arrested than white men, and that is unfortunately because more Aboriginal men commit crime. You have a look at the rates of domestic abuse, for one, off the chart. But to promote this idea that racist police are regularly killing Aboriginal men is not just a falsehood. Right now, in these circumstances, with what's going on in America, this is playing with dynamite. But have a look at the journalists now, on The Guardian as well, saying, aha, Australia actually has its own George Floyd case. Let's now get angry about that. Let's now march for David Dungay. Here's the ABC again.
Those deaths include Dongari man David Dungay, who uttered, "I can't breathe," 12 times before he died in a Sydney prison hospital in 2015 after being restrained by guards. Family members of David Dungay are drawing direct parallels with the death of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis police, which has sparked this widespread rioting in the United States.
Direct parallels. What a stupidly emotive and twisted account of the facts. Now, you're going to hear, over the next few days, mark my words, you will hear a lot more from activists about this particular case. So let me give you the facts. David Dungay died in Longbail Jail 5 years ago. That bit is true, and it's a very sad case. He had chronic schizophrenia, was actually psychotic. He also had a bad case of diabetes, which is a bit out of control. And he was spotted by warders eating biscuits, wouldn't stop. So he was a danger to himself. His blood sugar had been measured, it was already soaring. Warders forcibly moved him to another cell and held him down so a nurse could sedate him. And again, it's true, he called out he couldn't breathe, but most of the warders thought he was foxing again. Was that unreasonable? Excuse me if this footage is distressing, but I think you probably need to see it to make up your mind.
Please don't.
Well, stop spitting your blood and you might go away.
Yeah, I'll be quiet.
You're the one that brought this upon yourself, don't you?
Now, tragically, Dunga died. But the coroner then ruled, sad as that was, no one was to blame. He hadn't been suffocated. His heart had given out. Now, again, I shall read out some of the coroner's official findings. As I say, you're going to hear a lot of journalists and activists use this case to stir up trouble. The coroner said David has a number of comorbidities, acute and chronic, which predisposed him to the risk of cardiac arrhythmia, which is what killed him, such as long-standing, poorly controlled type 1 diabetes, hyperglycemia, prescription of antipsychotic medication, elevated body mass index, he was fat, a degree of likely hypoxemia caused by prone restraint that's being held down, and extreme stress and agitation as a result. This is the case that Australia is now being invited via the ABC to consider our George Floyd. I mean, really? This is the reason that we should now have protests here like we see right now in America about our alleged racism, about police brutality, about police murdering Aborigines. It is false, it is dangerous, and it must be resisted. How dare our national broadcaster feed the flames of racial tension like this? Meanwhile, in the United States, President Donald Trump declared he was the law and order president.
I will fight to protect you. I am your president of law and order.
Now, earlier in a phone hookup with state governors, Trump told them, warned them, get a lot tougher with protesters. He'd help them by offering them lots of National Guards to back up their police, but if they didn't take control, he'd send in the army.
We're strongly looking for arrests. You have to get much tougher. You're going to get overridden. Get a lot of men. We have all the men and women that you need. But people aren't calling them up. You have to dominate. If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time. They're going to run over you. You're going to look like a bunch of jerks. You have to dominate. And you have to arrest people and you have to try people. And they have to go to jail for long periods of time.
And then Trump went out and set an example himself, with demonstrators who've been occupying the Lafayette Park across the road from the White House, near the historic church called the President's Church, used by presidents, which had been partially burned by protesters on Sunday. Well, Trump had that park cleared of protesters and then walked from the White House to the church where he held up a Bible, because he was making a point. The protesters do not own the streets. Now, I've heard a lot of journalists being very upset about this, how provocative, how inflammatory, and upset about the way that police who cleared that park got a bit rough with an Australian film crew that really should have got out of the way. This is not playing around, friends. But I suspect many American voters would have liked that show of strength. I mean, can America really afford to have cities overrun by protesters? Can its governments, federal and state, afford to look so weak and so without faith in their moral right to rule in the name of all those who elected them? You either think governments are legitimate or you don't. And when you don't, you are inviting a civil war. Even the brother of George Floyd, could not stand these mobs. And he told them, if you do want change, then just vote for it.
What are y'all doing? Y'all doing nothing. Because that's not going to bring my brother back at all. It may feel good for the moment, just like when you drink. But when it comes down, you're going to wonder what you did.
Well said. What we're seeing is less a protest than a revolt against the governments of the United States. And that cannot stand.